The following is a conversation with Dr. Lan-Lan Smith, founding editor of the Lancet Haematology in 2014 and former senior editor at the Lancet Oncology from 2011. As part of the Lancet journal family, the Lancet Haematology is an exclusively online journal dedicated to publishing original research that advocates change in hematological clinical practice. And it is aimed to become the leading source for original research in clinical hematology. Since its launch, the journal has consistently published high-quality original articles and gained visibility and high impact in only 5 years. Prior to joining the Lancet family, Dr. Smith gained a PhD from Cancer Research UK, University College London, and held research posts in the Hemato-Oncology section at the Institute of Cancer Research and in the Department of Hematology Oncology at King's College London. We talked with her about science, its publication and communication, and the working processes within the Lancet Review of Research. We sincerely thank Dr. Smith for her rapid response to our request to speak on these topics, which could not be more relevant to young investigators and trainees who play with the thought of joining academia, but which are also rigorously discussed and debated in these times of scientific unrest. All in all, as Dr. Smith beautifully put it, science and its publication is about trust. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, as we did. Stay safe.
When, especially in Germany, we have now this diffusion of scientific publication and the scientific process into the society. Everybody is talking about how things get published and whether this journal is prestigious, like the New England or the Lancet, and everybody is talking about it. And let me begin maybe just with one question. Do you think that science as science as a process, as maybe a type of a topic in general, is good or evil?
Well, that's a very interesting question and not one that I would have expected to kick this interview off with, but I think science is a tool. It is an instrument that we use, and intent behind how the scientific process used can either be good or evil. I know obviously in Germany you have quite a historic past with the experiments that happened in concentration camps, and that is science, but nobody would say it should be done with modern ethics or even the ethics of the day. And I think in terms of discussion and communication, I think that's a really important part of science that sometimes gets a little bit neglected when you think about what the scientific process is, but it's that putting the results out there, having people comment on them, communicating about them and discussing them is really important in my view towards science, and something that as an editor, I like to think that we help facilitate. But I think, I come from a scientific background. I started out doing a PhD and doing research. Obviously, I wouldn't have gone into that sort of field if I didn't believe I could do some good or bring some benefit to it. So my personal view is that I think science and understanding how things work, which is what I really think is what we use science to do, to understand how the world works and how people work, and that understanding things is a good thing in my view. But obviously people can use the scientific process and scientific results for purposes that are not beneficial to humanity either. So I don't know whether that's really answered your question or not, but
it's a perfect question, because the perfect answer to a broad question, because maybe that brings us to the next point, that maybe gets sometimes a bit confused is because you indicated you are a researcher, or you have been a researcher, and there
Yes, in the past.
and maybe you shed a bit on the light on your way into the editorial process and the publication process, because maybe sometimes that gets a bit of mixed.
Yeah,
You
I
only
have to
get
say, no, that
without the other, not without the other. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great question, because yeah, a bit of my career history, I was brought up in a family of scientists, so it was pretty much assumed that I would become a scientist. Went to university, did my undergrad, next step obviously PhD, next step postdoc. So I never really stopped and thought very hard along the way where my career progress was going to go. But when I got to the postdoc stage, and I was working quite long hours in the lab, repeating lots of experiments, and I came to find that I was enjoying more the getting the data together and analyzing it and writing it up and seeing how we could communicate it more than actually going in and running like my 10th PCR for the day. So that sort of got me thinking about potentially moving on from a purely academic career. Also, the whole chasing grants the entire time was not particularly appealing to me. And I was quite lucky that I had a very nice first author paper that was published with Cell Stem Cell, which is quite a prestigious journal. And just that the whole process of what my paper went through, the peer review, getting it back, doing more experiments, it sort of made the research so much better than it was originally. And I was really interested in that process as well. So I thought I'd explore a little bit more about getting into publishing and scientific editing. And then I decided to make the leap and applied for a few different roles. Didn't get anywhere initially, but then a position came up at the Lancet Oncology, and I applied for that and was successful. My background is in acute myeloid leukemia genetics, so I had a relevant academic background for an oncology journal and joined them. And it was really interesting for me, because in many ways I feel sort of more of a scientist now than when I was sitting at the bench looking at a very specific question, because I'm constantly reading the latest and greatest research, thinking really critically about what the results mean, what they mean in the wider context of the field. So in many ways, I don't feel like I'm completely left the scientific world. So, and working with authors to improve their research and address questions has been really a rewarding part of the publishing process for me. And at the Lancet, we also publish not just original research, but we do commission our own reviews series, big projects commissions, which ask a real question and tend to and try to be blueprints for change. So we're not just reacting to what science is bringing us, but we're also acting as facilitators and saying, this is a really important medical or health question. Let's assemble a team of experts and get all these great minds together and write a blueprint for what we should be doing in the next 5 to 10 years for how we can change and improve things. So in that respect as well, that's a really rewarding aspect of scientific publishing.
But what you said your background is you're a hematologist in training as well?
I just had a PhD. I didn't do any MD, but I did work. My lab was connected with a hematology department in a hospital, so I did work with actually some MD PhDs.
And what was your driving force to get to, or to change to the publication process? What were the reasons, or was it just an opportunity that came apart?
Yeah, I guess I sort of didn't see myself as becoming a PI and running my own lab. Like originally, that was the whole idea. That's generally how the route goes. As I said, I wasn't an MD, so I didn't have the option of going to to become a consultant or treat patients. So as a researcher, you eventually you work your way up to running your own lab, and that just didn't really appeal to me in the end, and I started looking at other things that I could do with the skills that I had, and scientific publishing seemed to tick a lot of the boxes, especially in what I was enjoying, helping the PhD students with their thesis and data analysis and reading over papers and being part of the peer review process from the expert side. And so that's kind of what drove me there. I didn't really see a future career for myself where I would be very happy in in academia and scientific publishing. Obviously, there are other benefits as well, as in there's a much better work-life balance in a publishing kind of role rather than an academic role. So that was attractive as well. So, but I will have to say, one thing I really learned about when I got into scientific publishing is that deadlines are real. So
Yeah,
in academia, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, there's a deadline, but in the publishing world is like, well, if you don't meet that deadline, nothing's going to get published, so you better meet it. So that was a big change.
great. And you started then in Oncology, Lancet Oncology then.
Yes, that will be I'm coming up to my 10-year anniversary with the Lancet this July, actually. So I joined the Lancet Oncology as a senior editor, which meant I was mostly doing peer review. So assessing papers, inviting experts to review these papers. I'm happy to talk about more about the process of what we do with papers, which are submitted to us soon, uh, if you
Yeah, sure.
want. And I was a senior editor with the Lancet Oncology for about 3 years, and then the Lancet group were going through a expansion program where we were launching new titles, and they wanted to launch the Lancet Haematology, so I became the inaugural editor-in-chief of that journal. Ran the journal myself for about 5 years, and then we expanded again, and I've got a team with a deputy editor and a senior editor as well. So it's it's really great, and we're now publishing not only just original research but also reviews, viewpoints, and other content like that.
So you started as a reviewer then, senior editor, just reviewing papers. Could you just elaborate on how that works? Because
Yeah,
sometimes,
I'm happy to tell you about it probably will be easiest if I tell you what the sort of process is when we get submitted a paper and what a paper goes through when it comes to the Lancet group.
yeah.
So just as a caveat, the Lancet has full-time editors. I know a lot of scientific journals have academic editors, so the process is slightly different. But within the Lancet group, we all have full-time editors, and it
So
is our job.
the difference is that was my initial question, because we like MDs, we consider like reviewing is just a free work you do. You're not hired or
Yeah.
anything. Just for the listeners out there, that they recognize that Lancet, you're a position, you get paid. Your like Lancet is your enterprise or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's my full-time job
Yeah.
being an
Okay.
editor at the Lancet. So yeah, so just to tell you a little bit about what the journey of a paper is within the Lancet group, because I'm sure for a lot of authors, you submit your paper and it's this mysterious black box and you don't really know what happens, and then it gets kicked out again, and it's either reject, revise, or accept. So when you initially submit your paper to a journal in the Lancet group, you usually get at least 2 editors, in-house editors, who will look at it. And at that point, we can decide whether to reject it or to start peer review. Reasons for rejection could be in terms of novelty, scope. Sometimes people send us papers that are just not within the journal scope, or if the methodology isn't strong enough. For example, if you've developed a prognostic score but you haven't validated that in a independent cohort, we would reject something like that because the methodology isn't robust enough. But once we decide to peer review it, then we will invite 3 clinical experts within the relevant field and 1 statistical reviewer. So every single original research article gets a statistical review as well. And we try to invite reviewers from around the world, or so there's a nice global reach because we are a global journal. And obviously, if a paper relies on a database that is within a certain country, we'll invite a reviewer from that country who will hopefully be familiar with that database as well. So, and then we get their comments in. So these are from the academic reviewers, as you said, the ones that you do that as part of your contribution to science.
Did you choose them randomly, or is there a list of reviewers you have, and then you pick one by yourself, or how is the selection?
We invite the reviewers, so we basically look at the paper, see what the relevant questions are, look at the field, find an expert in that field and approach them directly. So it's quite a manual job for us, but with time you kind of grow to know who you should ask. But we're constantly looking for new reviewers as well. One of the really important things that we're working on at the moment is increasing gender parity within our reviewers. So to make sure that we're not just inviting the same old white men, I suppose, because we want to definitely have a breadth of viewpoints and opinions on research. And we try not to use the same reviewers over and over again. So we like to have different, as I say, looking for reviewers from different countries, and different levels in their career as well. Some early career researchers, some more established researchers, and usually we'll invite about 5 or 6 reviewers for each paper, and we look to get the comments of 3 reviewers. Obviously, if the reviewers don't all agree, we need to take into we may ask for more reviews, or if there's a specific, like if it's a modeling paper, we'll get a modeler to review it. So it is quite a manual process looking for clinical reviewers for us, but we just want to make sure that they're relevant to the field and can certainly answer critique the paper properly. And we also ask them to disclose any conflicts of interest they have. So if they have too many conflicts of interest, then we may say, well, thank you, but please don't review this paper for us. So yeah, so then the reviewers' comments come in and they can make their recommendations. They have comments to the editors and comments to the authors as well. And then at that point, each journal will make a decision. Do we want to reject the paper now, or do we want to proceed forward with it? And at the Lancet, we have manuscript meetings where each editor will present the paper that they're handling along with the reviewer comments and ask for opinions and comments from all the other Lancet editors. So not just say the Lancet Haematology where I am, but this will be open up for the entire Lancet group. It's a little bit like journal club for editors. So you present your paper, you present what the reviewer's comments were, you say, this is what we want to do with the paper, or you say, well, I'm not quite sure what to do with this paper. What does everyone else think? And then you get the expertise of the entire Lancet group, which is great because there's a lot of overlap between different topics. And for example, I would certainly comment on the hematology papers that are published in the Lancet Oncology or the Lancet Weekly, and say there's an infectious diseases aspect to one of our papers, our colleagues from the Lancet Infectious Diseases will say something, and we've done collaborations with other journals as well. So yeah, so and then after that meeting, we'll make a decision. Either the paper will get rejected or we'll decide to proceed with it. And usually at that point, we'll ask the authors to revise the paper. So at that point, we send the paper back to the authors with the comments from the reviewers and any additional comments from the editors saying, well, please add in more detailed reporting on the adverse events, or please take out this ad hoc analysis or this post hoc analysis. And then the authors will have an opportunity to review that, revise their paper, they resubmit it to the journal. The editor who's handling the paper reads over all their changes, their answers to the reviewer comments, and it is possible for authors to argue against reviewer comments, and as long as you make a compelling and decent argument, sometimes that will be accepted. So you don't have to, as an author, you don't automatically have to say, oh, do everything the reviewers say. But if you do want to argue against the reviewers, you should have a very good reasons for doing so. And at that point, if we decide that the revisions have addressed the reviewer's concerns and comments, we may get the paper re-reviewed, or we may use our own expertise and say, yeah, that answers that question. And then usually we will ask our authors to revise their paper again to sort of get everything into good shape for acceptance. We follow reporting guidelines within the Lancet group from the Equator Network. So if you have a randomized controlled trial, we expect all the data in the paper to fit the consort reporting guidelines. So we'll ask for anything that's missing, anything sort of little style things that will help us in the post-acceptance process. So then your paper gets accepted, which is great. And then at that point, there's a whole post-acceptance process, which is quite intensive. So your paper will then be assigned to an assistant editor who does the copy editing. And so this is rewriting sentences for style and clarity, and they're often PhDs and have a scientific background as well. And we sort of call the stage a bit of a micro peer review, because we're really going through the paper line by line and making sure all the data and the tables and the figures match up, and that the results make sense, and that we've got 95% CIs for all Kaplan-Meier curves and all of those details that are important. And once the paper has been copy edited, it will come back to the original handling editor, and they will do what we call a cross read, which is just to make sure that none of the scientific sense has been changed during the copy edit. And also if anything is missing or if something doesn't quite make sense, then we have a chance to go back to the authors and query what is going on, or if the numbers don't match up between the figures and the text, and say, well, which is the actual correct result. So then we're really lucky because we have an in-house production team, and they're the ones we have a fantastic illustration team who redraw all the figures, and the production team lay it out lay the paper all out on page, so it looks like it would do when it gets published as the final paper. And that proof gets sent to the authors. The authors have a chance to read over, answer any of the questions. Then it comes back to the editorial team again. And for my journal, we do what we call a final read, where is a brand new editor who's not really handled the paper before will read over the paper pretty carefully, just as you would as someone picking it up and reading it out of off of PubMed or somewhere. And then that's just a chance to catch any typos, any sort of, oh, that really doesn't make sense, and a final query to the authors, and then it finally gets published. And it goes up on the Lancet.com and sorry. Yeah, so it gets published and you can find it in PubMed, and we often commission comments that go along with the papers as well for original research from usually from someone who's reviewed, an academic who's reviewed the paper, just to put it into a little bit of wider context as well. And we can if it's something that we think is quite newsworthy, our press team will get involved and do a press release, or we also can do podcast interviews, or if it's something that we might want to do an infographic with, we have our media team can do infographics as well, that and promote papers on Twitter. And so there's a lot that happens with a paper. I would say about like at least 20 different editorial eyes will look over your paper between submission and publication if your manuscript does get published with us.
That's
so
interesting.
It's quite a process.
Because when you submit a manuscript, you always think of the editor and the reviewer. Like maybe 4 people at maximum. But it's very interesting that you like carefully read manuscripts and present it to other editors from other journals. I think that's a very nice, because fresh eyes are always the best to look at texts that are relevant or important. Or how many manuscripts do you need to read, like per week?
Well, it all depends on how many manuscripts are submitted to us. We do get kind of lulls, peaks and troughs. So over summer it tends to be a little bit quiet sometimes, but we do get a flurry at different times. So every manuscript that is submitted to the Lancet Haematology, we aim to have an initial decision within 48 hours, whether that will be a reject or send it to peer review, because we don't think it's very fair for authors to sit on their papers if we're not going to do something with it. And I will say also with the Lancet group, because we all work so closely together, we do have the opportunity of, you do have your opportunity of transferring your paper from one journal to another. So say, for example, you submit your trial to the Lancet Weekly, but they don't have the capacity to publish your study, but they think it'll fit better in one of the specialty journals. They may reject it, but suggest that you transfer it to one of the specialty journals where we would be interested, because it's better for that particular audience. So in that respect, that's something that's quite a bit more unique to the Lancet group as well, that you have the opportunity to potentially submit to one journal but get published in another one that's more with a more appropriate audience for your study. But the thing is, all the papers get treated the same way within the Lancet group. So
and within the decision process, there are always these categories: accept, major revision, minor revision, or don't you have that in your?
Yeah, we do have those. Those tend to be more reviewer comments from. We tend to have those more as categories that the reviewers will tell us. They can suggest, well, you should accept after my revision, minor revision, major revision, or reject. But when we make our decisions, we'll usually say, well, we're going to put points on it, which means we're asking the authors to revise. And if we're quite confident about the author's ability to address the reviewer's comments and the editor's comments, and we'll just ask them to revise it. If we're a bit more uncertain about which journal it should be published in, then we'll probably like put points neutrally and sort of say, well, we need to go through more peer review or more decision making before a final decision is made on your manuscript. So from our end, we wouldn't say to the authors, you need to do a major revision on it. We would just ask them to revise, or say, well, you need to revise, and when we haven't made a decision. It will depend on how well you do your revision, your revised manuscript. Well, once we see your revised manuscript, then we'll be able to make a decision. So
and
if that helps at all.
Did you think that, or did you see an increase in literature overload during over the last like 2 or 3 or 4 years?
We certainly do get more papers every year. Last year was a bit of an aberration because everyone got a lot more papers last year. I think some of the journals in the Lancet group has saw like a 300% increase in submissions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But we have gotten more papers in every year. So as you say, with increased visibility, that certainly helps. With when you're launching a new journal, a lot of it depends on sort of trading off of the Lancet brand and cascades from other journals. As I said, that mentioned that transfer from other journals can be very helpful for a new journal, especially when you're not in PubMed yet, you don't have an impact factor. It can be quite difficult to get people to, or even people just don't know that you exist. So, but as our visibility increases over time, we do get more papers, which is great. So.
No, what I observed in the Lancet Haematology, which is itself, I think, a enormous and complex discussion, because you mentioned the impact factor, but in Lancet Haematology, the impact factor from the beginning, as it only can be, is either non-existent or low. Yeah. But that didn't really say much about the quality, because the articles are high quality, as it were, from the beginning.
Yeah, I suppose our aim is to be the place to go for clinical research in hematology, and that includes obviously stem cell transplantation and everything from sickle cell anemia to to diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. It's quite a broad field, but my goal has always been to be a really good clinical resource, and I think that's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on in the Lancet family is making research as good and accessible as possible, because we try to take out jargon from papers and make it really clear what was done. And because we have a global readership, we wanted to make the language quite simple as well, take out sort of country-specific idioms and whatnot, and just so that people who have English as a second language can read the papers easily as well. And we recently started translating abstracts as well for local audiences. So if a paper is relevant to, say, Brazil, we would make sure to have a Portuguese abstract available. And for some reviews and commissions, that the whole article would be translated as well. So I think, yeah, impact factor is always a really tricky thing, because it's one way of measuring a journal, but it's a very crude way of measuring a journal, and the importance, it's certainly not a perfect system, and but it's a system that most people buy into at the moment. So, my kind of goal is more to make sure that every paper that we handle and publish is the best that it can be, and communicates clearly. So, and as you said, we've done that from the very beginning, and I think that's one of the great things with the Lancet group, that we do put so much care and attention into the papers post acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think there's a huge difference in quality and impact factor. Impact and quality is not always the same. And
yeah.
Maybe to go another step back to 2 points. You mentioned that your style, the Lancet style, when you submit a manuscript, always needs to have a specific journal style. That's what maybe authors always keeps awake at night, is my reference lists in accordance with a journal that I sent it to. And there is maybe you can elaborate on that a bit, and maybe just another provocative question.
Okay.
Why does the Lancet, as a few journals, have this point for the dot for the in Germany?
The floating, yeah.
Floating, yeah.
I have to
In the
admit, I
center.
never saw that. I never saw that before I joined the Lancet, actually, but
Yeah.
all I can say is I don't know the answer why, but I'm sure it's historical, but
Yeah.
it looks quite smart. So,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I didn't even know the difference between an N rule and a hyphen before I joined the Lancet group. So there was, I was like, ooh, there's all these proofreading marks and all these
Yeah.
fancy things. So, so if you do want to leap into scientific publishing, you don't need to know all those things beforehand. You can learn that on the job. But sorry, I've forgotten the first part of your question.
Now, did you
preparing a manuscript and the
do you
style.
send manuscripts back to the authors if they really don't have like a perfect Lancet style at first?
No, we wouldn't,
No.
of course.
Okay.
No, definitely not. We may send, for certain things like clinical trials, if there's no protocol, we would ask for the protocol so that we can assess the endpoints and the analyses. But obviously, if the reference list isn't perfect and the style is written not quite right, then we wouldn't. We would certainly assess the manuscript initially on the content, not the style. That being said, it certainly does help if you're preparing, when you're preparing your manuscript, to look at the information for authors and have a look at what format and what information we're looking for, because that will make it easier on us. As you say, we're reading a lot of papers every day. So I certainly wouldn't dismiss a paper out of hand because it's not in style, but it will certainly make my life easier if everything that I'm expecting to be there is there. I mean, I've gotten papers that have obviously been submitted elsewhere first and have been formatted for a different journal. Sometimes even in the cover letter, they'll say, "Dear editor of other journal," and they haven't even changed that. So, but no, I wouldn't reject a paper based on style. But as I say, it does help. And if you get through peer review and all of that process, you're going to have to do it anyway. So, and I would say also, if you're not sure about whether your paper falls in scope for a specific journal, then send a pre-submission query to the editors, maybe with just the abstract, because that would save you having to do all the formatting if they say, oh yeah, that is something we could be interested in, please submit the full paper, or say, sorry, that's not in scope, and then that saves you redoing your whole reference list or putting the methods after the introduction rather than at the end of the paper. So that's always a resource that I would suggest to authors to take advantage of.
And maybe another question on the other side of the line, what could go wrong? Because we saw that last year that these two articles, unfortunately in the Lancet as well, got a very, very high publicity because they were needed to be retracted. We don't need to go in detail into this, but maybe just if you could like suggest what could go, are there any, is the pressure so high that the mistakes naturally happen now?
We try to say that we do learn from our mistakes. So a lot of scientific publishing comes down to trust, I think, and a lot of science comes down to trust. And as editors, we have to trust that the data that authors are giving to us is real. And so, it's very difficult for us to say, we can't go and check out that database and access that database ourselves and look at the results look at the data in that database, which is, I think, what the papers that you're alluding to. But now because things like that happened and things come to light after they're published, we do change our systems, and now we ask all the authors, please provide who had access to all of this data, please provide which authors can have verified the data, and we'd like to see that more than one author has done that, and we would be quite suspicious if only one author, particularly if they're a non-academic author, is the only author that has access to that data. So we do try to improve our systems. We're involved in quite a few sort of groups, like the Committee on Publication Ethics, the COPE group, and the ICMJE editors group. So and these are issues that don't just affect the Lancet, but I think they affect a lot of different scientific publications, and we try to work out systems that reduce the chances of these things happening, because nobody wants to retract a paper. It's no fun, it's no good, and it means that something's gone wrong in the system beforehand. So we do try to learn from these mistakes and sort of improve the robustness of our checks and balances. But at the end of the day, it is a trust issue, and you have to say, do we trust the authors that what they're giving us is real? So.
And another point could be, I always think of that even if it was maybe a inner disaster for Lancet and even the New England journal, but my point is, maybe sometimes it's better published than not published but effective, because when it's published, everybody can see it, and you can at least retract it.
There's certainly a lot of interesting discussion that's happened, especially over the last year, over preprints and people citing preprints and everything, because it preprints are good because it gets things out there. People can start talking and assessing it soon. But then on the other hand, it's not been through the peer review process. And as you say, some things get through the peer review process and get published and then have to be retracted. And I mean, this brings us back to that very first question that you asked about science and what it's good for, or what is it not good for. And a lot of it comes down to communication and testing it, and as you say, knowing what's out there and seeing what research is there and being able to debate it is an integral part of the scientific process. So I think that as you say, it's tricky, because nobody wants to, you don't want to suppress data, but you want to, I suppose you want to make sure that what data you have is true, and that the authors and papers are publishing something that looks to be real and is useful. So but yeah, the scientific debate is very important, and a lot of the time when these retractions occur, it's because the paper's been published and people have said, hey, that's not right, and then we need to look into it more carefully. So
a professor once told me that science is true as long as it's false. So you need to be sure, and you need to do everything that if something is published, then it's published in the right way, in the best way we can now. And if it's considered false or a bit misleading, 10 years later, okay, then times change or new evidence appeared. But until then, it was the right way to do.
Yeah, I mean, we always develop new tools for observing the world. So obviously, these days you have next generation sequencing, and you can do like a whole genome in no amount of time for not much money. Whereas back in the 90s, it took years and years just to sequence the human genome. And so we have so many more tools now, so things will change, and we have different methods of working. And like, for example, in acute myeloid leukemia, for so many decades, it was just like chemotherapy based on mustard gas and stuff like that. But now we have all these targeted therapies that are working so much better. And now we have CAR T-cell technology and CRISPR technology, and there's just so much more that is possible these days, but you can't not build on previous research. And I guess as an editor, one of my goals is to make sure that the research that we do publish has been analyzed and done to a high standard, because I suppose when we publish it, we put our name behind it, we endorse that research. So that's why we make sure that we have an independent statistical reviewer to make sure that the statistical analyses that were done in a particular paper, whether it be a randomized clinical trial or a meta-analysis, has been done in a robust and correct way, and or whether the modeling has been done correctly. And for all our papers, we ask the authors to include a section on limitations and weaknesses in their papers, so they're quite frank and open about, well, this is the study, this is what we could do with what we had at the time, however there was this issue with it. So that is out there, so it is known.
Is there, do you take into account already preprints?
I mean, I think I would be quite cautious because it hasn't gone through that scrutiny yet. It hasn't gone through the peer review process. Although, you know, with some preprint servers now, they allow comments on papers, and you can sort of see the discussion that's been going on with that. So I think that things are probably going to change a bit within the next few years with preprints. I think for now, what we're doing is saying if people do cite something that's on a preprint, we'll flag that up as being a preprint, same as we would do for a conference abstract. So this is a piece of data that's out there, but it's not been through a rigorous peer review process yet. So we have the information, but with the caveats. So
will you do you think that it will be it will take a part in your work more often, or has a deeper impact in the future, the preprints, or what do you think? What is the road for this type?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't say exactly what the future holds, but probably preprints will become more important. And, you know, it's all part of open science, and we encourage open science and open discussion and access to research. So I think other fields like mathematics have long used preprints and have been able to do that. So obviously the medical side of publishing is catching up in that aspect. But I already we offer any paper that's submitted to us to be loaded onto a preprint server. Mm-hmm. Some authors want this, some don't, some accidentally say yes and then are unhappy about it, and then we'll take it down. So really, I think we wouldn't mandate that anyone has anything on a preprint server before they submit it to us. But I think with that, it's really very much author choice, which is what we sort of believe for a lot of things, that it's up to the author whether they want to engage with that kind of process or not beforehand. But we do help facilitate that if they do want their paper added to a preprint server.
Maybe quick reflection on 2 points, because you at the start you said your parents were scientists as well.
Yes.
What did they study, or what did they research?
My dad was an entomologist, and he worked for the Department of Natural Resources in Canada. So although I'm based in London, I'm Canadian and dual citizenship now. Not quite as good as it was before Brexit, but alas. And my mother worked in, did sort of biomedical research as well. So yeah, they were very much into science, and I think I was either destined to either love it or hate it. So I ended up going down the love it path, but not quite ending up at the bench like they were. So.
But did you have discussions about whether the whole system process changed, or is more rapid, or is better than before, like in the 90s or early 20s?
I can't honestly say I've discussed that much with my parents because my dad went into a government job after his degree, and my mother was more like a lab manager rather than a pure academic, like PI. So we never really talked about that much, but I definitely felt that sort of pressure when I was going through the system, doing my PhD and postdocing, that pressure to publish, the whole idiom publisher perish. And then it's not a great system. And it's certainly, and probably like the pressures of academia is probably another reason that I didn't want to stay in that system in the end, and decided to do a career change. But I think it's hard these days because there's so many things to think about, and there's so many options. And even now with all the predatory journals, you have to be really careful about those as well. And there's questions about open science, open access, where do you publish, where do you get funding from? And there's I think it does feel more complicated these days. But as I say, I've been out of the academic world for about a decade now, so I can't comment exactly on how it is these days. But I do still have friends who are in academia, and just that constant cycle of applying for grants and looking for your next amount of funding is really hard. So,
but even maybe on the journal side, is there pressure? Maybe you get emails from journals, International Journal of, or World Journal of I don't know, Cell and Engineering, which it doesn't exist, or it just exists on paper in, I don't know, Tahiti, or
I certainly do get soliciting emails from predatory journals. So
I
know.
What do you do then? Do you have
I just delete them.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just ignore them. Yeah.
Yeah,
but yeah, it is.
Yeah. Do you have pressure on the journal side? Do you feel that, or comes that?
Yeah,
with
I mean, there's different sort of pressures for sure there, because especially in hematology publishing, it's quite a competitive field. There's a lot of really good journals out there. So my goal is to eventually make the Lancet Haematology the go-to place for clinical hematology, because there isn't really a journal out there yet that is focused solely on clinical hematology. Other journals like Blood and Leukemia and Hematological, they also publish preclinical research. So I want to make Lancet Haematology the go-to place for clinical hematology. And that it's as I said, there's a lot of, it's a very competitive publishing world out there. There's a lot of great journals, but in that way, it's also really good for the authors, because you have a lot of choice and you have a lot of options. You can choose the journal that fits your goals the best. And one of the things that I really like about the Lancet Haematology and the Lancet Group in general is that we do have that freedom to sort of drive the content ourselves, as I was telling you before about commissioning series and reviews. Like last year, we collaborated with our colleagues at the Lancet HIV and published a series on people living with HIV who also have hematological malignancies, which I think was quite well received. So having that ability to have a voice, I think, is really special for the Lancet Group. And yeah, there obviously is things that you have to think about, the bottom line and whatnot, but that's not my main goal.
Yeah.
My main goal is certainly to be provide a good service to authors to help communicate their research. But for sure, like any field and any sort of business, there are internal pressures and external pressures. So it's not a completely stress-free life, so to say.
But maybe just to wrap it up, it's I thought of that today in the morning, because you said this whole publish or perish, and this is such a, in that case, a boring sentence, because it's I thought it's about publish or publish. Because
Yeah.
science needs to be published, but it needs to be published in a good way, not in a bad way.
I think that is one of the great things about having these larger journals where everything can get published now, because then there is no scientific waste, because you don't have to say, well, something didn't quite, it's not good enough for one of these prestigious journals, I'll just never publish it anywhere. And as you say, I don't think that's good. As we were discussing before, that's not good science. We want to have information out there, and just finding sort of the right place for it. And because there are so many options now, then even if a journal is just simply a repository for if you publish with a journal that doesn't do quite as much work as, say, the Lancet does, but just accepts your paper, peer reviews and accepts and publishes as is, but that's still a good thing for the scientific process. And it's great that there is more author choice now. It's just a shame that authors do have to be a bit careful with the predatory journals, and to make sure that they aren't they don't get on the wrong end of the stick for that. So
yeah, that's beautifully summarized, I guess.
Thanks, you're being very generous.
What is the future with hold for you? How long is there a time period you are allowed to be an editor-in-chief, or are there elections, or what's next for you?
No, we don't have, it's not like other academic editors where the publisher may decide to change academic editors every few years or whatnot. At the Lancet Group, you can certainly stay at the Lancet for quite some time if you want to. There's certainly people who have had made quite good careers and have stayed within the Lancet Group for a long time. So yeah, I don't have any plans on leaving the Lancet Haematology quite yet. I sort of feel like I've gotten to a really nice place now with my deputy editor and senior editor, Yaisa Del Pozo Martin and Emma Cookson. They're both fantastic editors in their own right, and we work really well as a team. So I think that's yeah. I don't think I'm going to get kicked out anytime soon, hopefully.
Great. Thank you very much for that conversation and for that spontaneous connection. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, we're really happy that you made it.
Oh, well, I hope your listeners found this interesting. So, and
definitely,
thank you for inviting me.
Because it's I think that's one of the most relevant questions young investigators have, is okay, what's going on within such gray areas like publication. I do my work, and then what happens then I get a rejection and I'm frustrated.
Yeah, and I completely understand. You pour your heart and soul into this, and then you get rejected, and it's not a good feeling, for sure. But the thing, I think, as we said, like one of the great things is that there are lots of journals out there now, and as you say, we should publish. So we'll find the right home for your research. And like the Lancet Group itself is expanding. We've got, I think, 22 different journals launched at the moment. We just started our regional health program, where we have fully open access journals that will be covering different parts of the world. So you have the Lancet Europe and the Lancet Western Pacific have already launched. So if you have something that is less of a global reach but more of a region specific, that's an option as well. So we're hopefully we can find a home for relevant research.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.